Hey, it's Dave Dubay, and in this short, hopefully short video, I want to share with you how I do my nighttime photography. In this case, I'm going to be specifically talking about my moon photo, the moon photo of the blood moon, which happened here on January 20th, 2019. And here are the tools I use and the settings that I set my camera to. So first off, you're going to want to need one of these. This is a Vanguard tripod, so I'd pick yourself up a good tripod. Make sure you have something good to use. And I mean, it could be a very inexpensive tripod, does not matter, as long as it can hold your camera up without you having to hold it yourself. Another thing you're going to want to need is going to be a shutter release. These are extremely important to get. This is a corded one. This thing was like $9. So if you have a Canon, a Nikon, or a Sony, you get a corded one. They're dirty cheap, and they're super simple, super easy to use. And they help you take awesome photographs because you don't want to get what's called shutter shake or camera shake, which blurs your photos, especially when you're trying to handhold it. And when you're pushing the shutter release on the actual camera, you're actually putting pressure on it. Even though it's mounted to a tripod that might be very stable, you could still add some shake to it. That's why having a shutter release corded one is probably best. A, they're really inexpensive. B, they're extremely reliable, as opposed to some of the ones that aren't corded can be very unreliable, which I've had plenty of experience with. So, lenses. If you're doing lightning photography, you're trying to shoot lightning, a very small fisheye maybe, but in this case here, this is a 17 to 50 millimeter 2.8 Tamron lens that I've used for ages. I've had many Nikon cameras and I've just kept the same lenses that have worked well for me. And this one here has been an awesome one. So I'm shooting at 17 millimeters, typically at either f16 to f22, and my exposure times are anywhere between 5 seconds to all the way up to 30 seconds before I release. And I'll explain that part to you here in a bit. Now, if you're doing something like you're trying to get the moon, here's a very, very, very cheap lens. This is a Quantaray. I don't even think Quantaray exists anymore. This is a 70 to 300 lens. This is a really cheap lens. Another thing I always do is I use manual focus when I'm trying to do something like the moon. And even when I'm doing lightning photography, it's typically not, so on the lens, it goes to infinity. It's not quite infinity. It's like a very tiny 2 millimeter turn from infinity to typically have the best focal length when you're catching lightning. At least I found that with the lenses that I've used myself. It could be different for yours. I don't know. I've never actually owned a Canon camera or a Sony for that matter. So another thing too is the lens. So here's the lens that I use for my moon photos. And the reason I use this lens is because, well, it's a 2.8. It's a Tamron 70 to 200 2.8 lens, which is awesome because it lets in a lot of light no matter what focal length I'm at. And if I really need to, I can use that 2.8 lens. I can go as low as 2.8, which means I'm letting in the most amount of light. Once again, I set it to manual focus. I manually focus as I'm taking photos of the moon. That way, once it's set, it does not change, and it makes it super simple, super easy. So you set your camera to manual, and then after that, the thing you're going to want to do for the shutter, in this case, is set it to what's called bulb, B-U-L-B, bulb. So it's typically the lowest setting for shutter. And what it enables you to do, so I'll try to get it focused here. So it says bulb there. So bulb and f8. This was the settings that I mostly used last night in taking that shot. It was set at bulb, which means when I push the button down, however long I hold that button, the shutter release, is how long it's exposing the said film, the digital film in this case, right? I let go, boom, it's done. If I hold it for a second, it shoots for a second. 2 seconds, 3 seconds, does not matter. However long I hold it down is how long it exposes the digital film. The other thing you're going to want to play with is going to be the ISO. So once you set your camera in manual, because you want to do this in manual, you cannot do this in automatic. Once you do that, then you're going to want to tell it what f-stop you want it to be in, right? So at that point, you'll set the f-stop, you'll set the shutter to bulb, the f-stop to whatever you want, and then you'll want to make sure your ISO is set appropriately. And ISO is the speed of the film. The higher the number of the ISO, so it starts off at 100, then goes to 150, then 200, then 400, then 800, then 1600, then 3200, and so on and so forth. Okay, that higher the number, the faster the film, which means you can take a really quick photo and it'll capture way more light at higher numbers. The problem is you lose detail the higher that number is. I never go higher than 800 when it comes to my ISO. Almost never. I have before, I almost never do. Okay, so if I'm doing nighttime photography, it's normally 400. Okay, so, and then I just mess around with my f-stop, always keeping my shutter on bulb, but I play with my f-stop, and I go back and forth with my f-stop, and then I also play with how long I hold the shutter release down. So the remote I have, once again, when I've dropped, I hold it down for longer and shorter just to see, because afterwards I can look at the photos and see what does it look like. So how good was the photo? And then I can shoot again and again and again. Especially if you're doing like moon, the moon's not moving very fast, and as long as there's no clouds or very few clouds, you're not gonna have issues with it being covered up and not getting the right shot. That's the nice part. So that's what I recommend you do. And once again, if you're doing something like lightning photography, you want obviously a smaller millimeter lens. Like in this case, this is 17, I have it at 17 millimeters, and then I'm taking anywhere between, 2 seconds to sometimes 30 seconds or even more exposures, but I have it set usually to f16 or f22, what have you. And the reason is because it's letting in very little light, and I can leave the shutter open a lot longer, so when the lightning does strike, it's going to catch the right moment, and I just let go of the shutter and I've caught it. So that's how I do it. So I hope this was helpful for you. It doesn't matter if you have a Nikon, a Canon, a Sony, it all pretty much works the same. Now, mirrorless, I can't necessarily tell you. My mirrorless that I have, I've tried it, and here's the problem. If I'm doing a 13-second exposure, after 13 seconds, it needs a whole 13 seconds before I can actually take another photo. And that sucks. And maybe that's just my Panasonic. I don't know. I have no idea. Until I get another mirrorless camera, that's what I know, and that's why I use the mirror one for it. So anyway, once again, Dave Dubé, it was a pleasure. Hopefully this helped you, and I will catch you again soon. Take care.